Yo, what's up guys, welcome to my humble YouTube channel where I bring you fanfiction that will brighten your days. Before we start, a subscribe is greatly appreciated, and don't forget to leave a like and ring the bell icon so you won't miss exciting new fanfiction stories. Tensura. Melting the Eternal Frost by JackDaWeb Chapter 14, welcoming the guests. Masayuki's Pav's Soul Devourer. That's his title. How terrifying. But what really caught my attention was how terrified my comrades looked now. Did they just now realize how much they screwed up? In a flash, all three of them bowed deeply toward the two before us, which scared me shitless. V. Velzard-sama. Please forgive our impudence, they pleaded loudly. The woman in question simply giggled in response, and Rimuru sighed audibly. Foo, your banter was amusing to witness, she replied jokingly. That was definitely no simple banter. She passed a glance at my party members and eventually looked at me with curiosity. Era, you seem to be quite lost, Hiro-san, she said to me, and I became confused. The other three turned to me with widened eyes full of fear and concern. Without even realizing it, Jinrai got behind me and shoved my head down into a bow. What the heck, man? Forgive our leader, your majesty. Ichi's still a new adventurer, he explained in a panicked state, and the other two nodded profusely to back him up. Foo, that is fine. It seems he does not know who I am anyway, she said dismissively. Jinrai released his hold on my head and I slowly looked up. Ouch, my neck hurts. Are you perhaps an otherworlder, Masayuki? Rimuru suddenly asked, which surprised my party, but I gave him a look of confusion. What the hell is an otherworlder? Otherworlder? I asked in confusion while tilting my head slightly. Someone not from this world and got here either through reincarnation or summoning, he explained briefly. I guess I am then. I guess I am, I answered honestly, and he nodded in response. The other three looked at me completely shocked but remained silent. I knew the name Masayuki sounded too Japanese to be a coincidence, he muttered quietly, which caught my attention. You know of Japan, Rimuru-san? I asked a bit excitedly. He might be someone who reincarnated into this world. Of course. I originally came from Japan after all, he responded cheerfully, and my eyes lit up. Finally, a fellow Japanese. Really? That's a relief to hear, I said joyfully, and he smiled. My comrades were still looking at me in surprise and awe. Let's continue discussing things elsewhere. There's a bar nearby, let's all go there, he urged us. My party and I looked at one another and nodded in agreement. We decided to accept Rimuru's offer gratefully and followed him to the nearby bar. The four of us followed shortly behind him and his second-in-command, who was clinging to his arm the whole walk. TCH, lucky bastard. On our walk, my party quietly explained who the woman was, and all I could say was, what the hell? Apparently, she's one of the 3 living true dragons in this world. The true dragons are the most supreme and powerful beings in all of existence. The bombshell for me is that the woman before us is the strongest one of the 3. And another one of them lives here too. This Rimuru guy is scary as hell. He's collecting the strongest like their Pokemon or something. After a short walk, we eventually arrived at the bar and entered. The vibe of the place was incredibly nice and perfectly emulated the feel of bars from Japan. The lighting was perfectly dim, yet still enough for you to see clearly. We took our seats at the counter and initially declined to drink. But Rimuru insisted that we ordered, so we humbly accepted. Rimuru's pog, because I ended up nearly killing them with my aura earlier, I decided I'd treat the unexpected guests to a drink. What? They started it, alright. And I perfectly restored them afterwards, so it's all good anyway. If there's any solid way to make it up to your fellow man, offering him a drink is a go-to way. That aside, I was surprised to learn that Masayuki is an otherworlder, from Japan no less. Meeting with otherworlders is something that happens only a handful of times, so I asked him how he got here. His story is similar to Hinata's in that they didn't die and reincarnate or were summoned, but instead, just randomly popped into this world. I believe they were called strays. The most interesting thing about him was the unique skill he acquired when getting here. Velzard, Masayuki, and I transferred a few seats away from the other 3 to discuss things more privately. I placed a soundproof barrier around us and cast an illusion on his party to make sure they wouldn't come close to us. So about your troublesome skill, as you put it, would you mind explaining some more? I initiated the conversation and took a sip out of my glass. He paused to take a deep breath before speaking. It's called, Chosen One. and the best way I could describe it is some kind of plot armor. Since you're from the same world as I am, you should know what that means, right? He asked for confirmation and I nodded. Plot armor skill, huh? Ha ha ha. That seems quite handy if you're asking me. Where's the trouble in that? I asked jokingly, and a look of distress formed on his face. It's like events around me are being guided by some higher supernatural force because things seem to go in a direction that makes me appear heroic to people. It works completely passively and there's no way to disable it. While it has gotten me out of tight situations, I'm now being lauded as some brave and strong hero when I never even defeated an opponent once. He ranted loudly and took a swig at his drink afterward. Velzard and I only chuckled at his predicament. You, my friend, are the embodiment of suffering from success. Ha ha ha, I joked while giving him a light slap on the back. Sigh. It gets so bad that I get so close to death numerous times because people around me think I'm that capable. He added frustratingly. Honestly, his situation is really funny. He's literally complaining that he's succeeding too well. We asked him for specifics regarding his unique skill, like what sub-skills it has. He listed 5 of them and what they did, and I gotta say, this skill is borderline insane. Banner of the Supreme King. Allows the user to call upon their fallen allies and replicate their abilities, memories, and experiences inside the user. Hero's Action. Guides the user's allies down the path of becoming heroes, eventually making their name famous. Hero's Blessing. Bestows the user and their allies with immense luck. This makes normally lethal attacks not deal their normal damage, and the user and their allies' attacks deal the most damage possible. This also makes all actions of the user being viewed in a positive light, no matter what it is. Hero's Charisma. Empowers the user's allies with immense courage that enables them to fight even in the most desperate situations. It also has the effect of turning defeated enemies into allies. Hero's Hockey. An aura that allows the user to freeze weaker targets in place and bend them to their will. Velzard and I were speechless at this information. This skill is ridiculous. For a unique skill, it performs nearly on the level of an ultimate skill. Thankfully, Velzard and I aren't affected by it since we wielded powerful ultimate skills ourselves. But that doesn't make it any less impressive. It kind of worries me what that skill will become if it ever evolves into an ultimate skill. That is not a problem, Rimuru-sama. If you want, I can place a permanent seal on that skill so that it becomes unusable and doesn't evolve. Seal. There's no need to do that. He's quite a timid guy, so he won't be a threat to us even if that does happen. Fufufu. Just looking out for you, Rimuru-sama. Any potential threat must be dealt with, but I'll let this one slide. Also, is it that easy that you can casually say something like that? With the use of skill nullification from Shub-Niggurath, many ultimate level skills can be nullified easily. A unique skill of this caliber would be shut off as easily as a light bulb. Is that so? That sub-skill is truly terrifying then. I'm glad you created it, Seal. He. Praise me more, Rimuru-sama. Shub-Niggurath and Azathoth are my pride and joy, the most ultimate of ultimate skills that are only fitting for you alone. Ha ha ha. You really can't restrain yourself sometimes. But that's exactly why I've gotten this strong. Thank you, partner. It is my pleasure, Rimuru-sama. It seems like Masayuki won't be a threat to me like there was any doubt at all. But he could still give some of my subordinates a run for their money, albeit unintentionally on his end. I wonder, would it be a good idea for him to enter the fighting tournament? Masayuki, would you like to join the upcoming tournament? I asked him curiously with a hint of excitement, and he tilted his head in confusion. Tournament? He asked. A fighting tournament. One of the main events of the founding festival is the grand opening of the Colosseum, where a fighting tournament will take place. I explained passionately, and his face turned into one of horror as he nearly spat out his drink. Absolutely not. Only 2 things will happen if I do enter. I somehow make it to the end with my bullshit skill and everyone will want me to challenge you, or I get completely whooped by some other combatant. Either way, I'll be cooked. He explained frantically, which earned a chuckle from us. Ha ha ha. It won't be that bad, Masayuki, I reassured jokingly as I wrapped my arm around his shoulder and took a swig of my glass. Fufufu, how cruel of you, Rimu-kun. Velzard joked after taking a sip from her glass. There's no way I'll make it out alive, he voiced loudly. Don't worry. I won't have anyone dying in the tournament, and if people do want you to challenge me, You can always refuse them. I retorted happily. I'm becoming really sadistic. I'll think about it. He caved in defeat. Yosh. That's the spirit. Cheers. I exclaimed in victory as I held my glass out to him, which he reluctantly toasted. I'll give you the specifics at a later date. For now, you guys can tour around the city and enjoy the festivities. I'd really like to give you all a personal tour, but I'm extremely busy at the moment. I told him earnestly. I would have loved to tour them around personally like I've always done for guests before, but my plate is extremely full at the moment. That's fine, Rimuru-san. Thanks for the offer, he replied respectfully. Third person POV. After finishing their drinks, the group thanked Rimuru and proceeded to explore the city. Rimuru got back to work, and this time he had his hands full with preparing for the arrival of the guests. The guests in question are the leaders of nations that held diplomatic ties to Tempest, namely, the armed nation of Dwargon, Sorcerer's Dynasty Sarian, Kingdom of Blumond, and the Holy Empire of Lubelios. Milam was also invited, of course, along with Carrion and Frey. Things were hectic, but everyone couldn't be more excited. The Colosseum and dungeon have been fully completed and are ready for the grand opening. Festivity was all around in the air, and the city had never looked so vibrant as before. One of the highlights of the whole event was the upcoming music festival, which brought a variety of music from Rimuru's old world into this one. Rimuru also briefly went to Ingrasha to invite his students and Yuki. He wanted to keep an eye on the Grand Master of the Guild, so he was invited to come to Tempest. Sue and his crew would keep a close eye on Yuki from the shadows to watch out for any suspicious movement. They were also tasked with keeping the kids safe and making sure they didn't cause a ruckus. A few days later, the night of the opening had come. The guests were about to arrive at Tempest and everyone was ready. Rimuru and Velzard would be the first to arrive at the dining hall where the nobles would be welcomed. The executives were also prepared and would arrive shortly after the two. Veldora wasn't around since he was busy running his takoyaki stand in the city. Velzard's POV the day had finally arrived for the founding festival to commence. Tempest has been incredibly busy for the past few days, but it is now time for the fruits of everyone's labor to pay off. The city had never looked better since I first arrived, and the atmosphere was ripe with festivity. I entered the hall just in time before the guests arrived. My seat was next to Rimuru's, and the others began arriving one at a time until every member from Tempest was here. Me, Rimuru, his highest-ranking executives, and Ramirez along with her subordinates were sitting at a long table inside the grand dining hall waiting for all the noble guests to arrive. The first to arrive was the Dwarven King, Gazel Dwargo, along with two of his subordinates. Next was the King of Blumond and his wife, as well as some bodyguards. Following not long after is Luminous Valentine posing as a maid for Louis Valentine, and Hinata Sakaguchi was with them as expected. Milam and her subordinates were the next to arrive, and I couldn't help but widen my eyes in shock. This was the first time I'd seen her in Tempest. I knew she came here to help with some things at the dungeon, but I was away doing my own things at the time. A solemn feeling suddenly struck my chest as a wave of regret washed over me. However, looking at Milam and how happy she was now somewhat eased me, and I decided then and there that I would talk to her when I got the chance later. The last guests to arrive shocked the other nobles in the room, as it was none other than the Emperor of Sorcerer's Dynasty Sarian herself, Elmesia Elru Sarian. Accompanying her are two elves that Rimuru was already acquainted with, the Archduke Errol Grimwald and his daughter, Elian Grimwald. The other guests were surprised to see the Empress, since she supposedly didn't leave her domain much, which sort of reminded me of how I used to be. Once the guests had all sat down and composed themselves, they turned their attention to the man of honor, the Demon Lord Rimuru Tempest. He was looking extra majestic and dignified tonight. Fufufu, Shuna and I really shaped him up for the occasion. I myself was looking quite illustrious for tonight's opening. Rimuru then looked around at the guests with a warm smile before speaking. I would like to thank all of you for answering my invitation. As you may all know, I have recently been officially acknowledged as a new member of the Demon Lord Council. So with that, I decided to host a grand event to celebrate the occasion. My hope with this festival is to reshape what it means to be a Demon Lord in the eyes of the world, which also means that everyone is welcome to experience all that Tempest has to offer. And to my esteemed guests, I hope you all enjoy your stay. He proclaimed with full confidence and majesty, befitting of a king. The guests' eyes slightly widened before they erupted into applause. Ho ho! You've gotten quite good with your speeches, Junior, Gazel praised earnestly. Of course I have, After your harsh criticism of my speech last time, I couldn't get it off my mind, Rimuru replied cheerfully. Era. What's with you calling him Junior, Gazel Dono? Elmisia chimed in curiously. This guy likes to think he's my senior just because he's been ruling longer than me. Rimuru answered bluntly, which earned a chuckle from a few of the guests. It's not just that. You still have much to learn as a king, although I can say for certain that you've improved significantly. Gazel added to his praise. Thanks, I guess. Rimuru replied with a bit of uncertainty. Oh, you two have known each other for a long time? Milam suddenly asked. Yes, Milam. We formed diplomatic ties just before you first visited me actually. Rimuru explained. Foo. It seems that the guests still haven't grasped Milam's appearance yet. Really? That's quite the timing then, she remarked. Suddenly realizing the name mentioned, almost all the guests had a shocked expression and turned to the girl. Milam? As in the destroyer? Nearly every guest asked in pure shock. Wahahaha. Yes. It is I, Milam Nava, one of the ancient demon lords. She introduced herself proudly and the guests were in awe. Foo. She really hasn't grown up much at all. After a few seconds, the majority had regained their composure somewhat. Rimuru Dono, you really should inform us ahead of time for important things like this, Errol said while rubbing his temple in mild frustration, and Gazel nodded in agreement. Foo. It sounds like this isn't the first time something like this has happened, Elmisia remarked while looking at Errol expectantly. She's quite a sharp one. The last time I visited here, I was suddenly struck with the news that the storm dragon had been revived and was residing in Tempest. Errol explained briefly, which earned a shocked response from a few of the guests who hadn't confirmed that information. Ehehe. I'll try and inform you all next time. Rimuru replied sheepishly while rubbing the back of his head, which was met with a sigh from Gazel and Errol. You really are quite the abnormal one, Rimuru-san. Lewis commented in jest and Rimuru simply chuckled in response. By the way, there's one other thing I'd like to confirm. Elmisia suddenly chimed in with a somewhat serious tone. Gazel and Errol looked at her in confusion but then immediately understood her intentions. What is it, equals? Elmisia-san, Rimuru asked curiously. Are the rumors true? Elmisia questioned vaguely, which confused Rimuru. The white ice dragon, Rimuru Dono, Errol added, which clarified things for everyone. Is it true that she now resides in this nation and has taken your side? Gazel asked further, and now all eyes were on Rimuru. He looked around at the guests calmly before closing his eyes with a sigh. I suppose a formal introduction should be in order next. Since everyone here already knows who I am, I'll let the person you're all curious about introduce herself, he said while shifting his gaze towards me. The guests followed his eyes and everyone's attention was now on me. Foo, how cruel of you, Rimuru. I stood up gracefully while keeping a calm smile on my face. I patted down my dress and looked at everyone who was waiting in silent anticipation for my introduction. Good evening, esteemed guests. My name is Velzard, the White Ice Dragon. As some of you may have all surmised by now, the rumors are indeed true and I do in fact reside in Tempest. It's my pleasure to meet all of you. I introduced myself with full elegance and majesty. The room fell silent as the guests who hadn't met me yet slowly took in the information. Their eyes immediately widened and their faces filled with shock as my introduction finally set in. I curiously looked over to Milam, whose eyes were also wide in surprise, but for some reason, I could see a look of excitement too. The majority of the guests promptly stood up the next instant. Velzard-sama, Auntie. They yelled in unison. Foo, no need to be so alarmed everyone. Also, Rimu-kun is right, we should all introduce ourselves formally. I suggested calmly and I sat down. The rest slowly calmed themselves and sat down as well. The guests began formally introducing themselves. There weren't that many and each introduction was kept brief, so it went by quickly. Once everyone was acquainted with each other, the feast commenced. Safe to say that the food today was extra delicious compared to how it usually is. Everyone really put their absolute best into this event and it easily shows. The guests were all astonished by the amazing dishes, even those who've already experienced the cuisines of Tempest. On a side note, I restrained myself from teasing Rimuru as much as I usually do since this was a formal event. Foo, I would have loved to see everyone's reaction to our peculiar dynamic. He was currently engaged in some small talk with the guests and also informed them of the various events to come during the festival. This went on for a while until suddenly some of the guests' attention was on me. I was kind of spacing out, just enjoying my food, so I hadn't noticed until Rimuru tapped me on the shoulder. "So, Velzard-sama, if you don't mind me asking, what made you decide to move to Tempest?" Elmisia asked curiously and in a friendly manner. A few of the guests looked at me patiently in anticipation of my answer. Foo. I guess I don't mind sharing a bit. It was during Rimu-kun's ascension into a demon lord that I decided to move here. I was surprised to see my little brother, Veldora, show up at Walpurgis, and was even more surprised to learn that he had taken Rimu-kun's side. On a whim, I decided to move to Tempest to keep an eye on Veldora-kun. Plus, Rimu-kun managed to pique my interest, so there's that too. I answered honestly, and the guests looked somewhat surprised. Rimuru looked kind of embarrassed but tried his best to hide it. I guess that makes sense. When the rumor first spread, I adamantly denied that such a thing could happen, but I guess reality is strange at times. Gazel remarked earnestly, and Errol nodded in agreement. It's safe to say that in terms of military might, Tempest is up there in the rankings. A true demon lord with the backing of 2 true dragons is something that's never been heard of, Errol stated as a matter of factly. Foo. But I'm sure Rimuru-san here will need that much power, Elmisia commented jovially. You're right. Aside from just protecting my nation and allies, I'm going to need power to accomplish my goals, Rimuru replied boldly. Hearing that takes me back to your saying, ideals without power are nonsense, and power without ideals is empty. Short yet simple, those are good words to live by. Gazel praised genuinely, and Rimuru scratched the back of his head with an awkward smile. Such a fine quote, Rimu-kun. I suppose you said it before we met, I chimed in teasingly. Why yeah. It was before I attended Walpurgis and became recognized as a demon lord, he answered sheepishly. It was his answer to my question when I asked him what he would do with such power, Errol added, and we all lightly chuckled at the sentiment, much to Rimuru's embarrassment. Suddenly, Milam floated herself to where we were, and I became momentarily stunned. Sensing my somewhat distressed state, Rimuru put his hand on my shoulder to assure me that things would be fine. I quickly calmed down and regained my usual smile as Milam quickly reached us. Wahahaha. What do you say we spar for real this time, Rimuru? Milam suggested joyfully, and Rimuru immediately had a look of disapproval on his face. No way. As I am now, I'm still nowhere near your level, Rimuru denied instantly. Milam looked unsure, and instead raised an eyebrow at him and looked at him intensely, almost as if examining him with her eye. I wouldn't be so sure about that. Nothing can be hidden from my eyes, Rimuru. You've gotten so much stronger since Walpurgis, she retorted excitedly, and Rimuru looked to me as if pleading with me to help him out. Foo. Suddenly, Milam turned around to face me with a look of excitement. Plus, I'm sure you've been helping Rimuru grow in strength, Auntie Velzard, she said cheerfully, which threw me by surprise. Well. I guess I have been teaching him a few things here and there, but he's right, you know? While he has the greatest potential for power I've seen, he's currently nowhere near your level, Milam-chan. I explained softly with a gentle smile, and Milam pouted cutely at my statement, upset that she couldn't get to spar with Rimuru. Aw man, I really thought I could have a friendly battle with Bestie, she said dejectedly, which somewhat stung me on the inside. Like some sort of ant instincts, seeing her sad pained me in a way. How about this? When I become stronger, I promise to spar with you, Milam. Besides, it won't be fun for you right now considering I'd lose almost right away, Rimuru said, attempting to cheer her up, which worked almost right away as her eyes lit up in pure joy. The other guests just looked at our interaction with intrigue and some mild concern. You promise? Milam asked eagerly while shaking his shoulders profusely. Yes, I promise. Now please stop shaking me, he pleaded loudly, and Milam complied, now incredibly excited at the thought of sparring with her best friend. Suddenly, a thought entered my mind, and I slowly approached my niece. What about we have a spar instead, Milam-chan? There's an upcoming fighting tournament that will be held in the new Coliseum. We could enter it as some sort of special event in the tournament, I suggested calmly with a warm smile, and her eyes lit up even more. Rimuru had a look of sheer horror on his face, however. Do you mean it? Anti-Velzard? Milam asked excitedly as she got up close to me with stars in her eyes. I gave her a smile and a nod of approval. Oi! What do you two think you're doing? A battle like that would destroy the entire city? Rimuru protested frantically. The other guests somewhat had a look that shared the same sentiment, but I could tell they also wanted to watch it. Foo, don't worry about it, Rimu-kun. It's only a friendly spar. Besides, with the help of Veldora-kun, you could maintain a strong enough barrier to contain the bottle's destruction. I suggested reassuringly, which somewhat eased him, but he was still incredibly tense. The guests were now more eager to watch such a battle take place. I vouch for this idea, Rimuru. Just think of the publicity this event would generate. It's a grand spectacle that most people won't ever get to see in their lives. Ramirez chimed in excitedly, and now almost everyone was on board. Rimuru still looked unsure and worried. This would be the perfect special event for the opening of the Colosseum, Rimuru-sama. Once the main bracket of the tournament is finished, this fight could serve as the greatest finisher to an opening celebration. Benimaru added, and the executives all nodded in agreement. Rimuru sighed audibly in defeat and finally caved in. Do you two swear you'll hold back? He asked while pinching the bridge of his nose. Milam and I nodded in confirmation. Then I guess we could arrange this event as the finale of the tournament. It should be a completely separate battle from the main bracket, he said somewhat begrudgingly and slumped on his chair in defeat. We're lucky to be able to witness such a grand event, Errol remarked excitedly, and the other guests nodded in agreement. A battle between the gods is about to take place, Gazel added. Wahahaha. Then it's settled, Auntie Velzard. I will take you on in the tournament, she declared excitedly and raised her fist to me. By the way, Milam-chan, I said and paused to steel my resolve as I readied myself to ask her to have a one-on-one conversation. She turned to me with a curious look. What is it, Auntie? She asked curiously while tilting her head. I leaned in closer to whisper my request to her. After our spar, there's something I'd like to talk to you about. Will that be fine?